and I do make mistakes.
Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I have a son and daughter here at BYU. I don't actually work at the university, but shortly after we moved here 3 years ago, I think we called into a bishopric. It's a much nicer building than we get to use on Sunday. Tom and I were chatting during the last session, and actually before the last session, and discovered that we both did our undergraduate work in Indiana at our arch rivals. I went to a small college called Wabash College. I'm a convert to the church. I joined the church when I was 32, and Tom went to DePaul, 26 miles down the road. It was our arch rival. They also had co-eds at their school. We did not. We were an all-male college. That was quite an advantage, I think, at DePaul. And the stories he'll tell are reminiscent of some of the ones in my own life, and it really was fun to listen to him. After DePaul, Tom went to Indiana University Medical School, and 3 years after that, started or sold his first company, but I'm sure he'll tell you the details. And then has had quite an extensive life of starting and running his own companies. Now, I think it's going to be a very entertaining and very informative time for all of you. It certainly was for me listening the first time. What a pleasure it is to get to know you. Now, I will tell you, I very seldom ask anybody to give someone an applaud before they speak, but in this particular case, it's well-deserved. And if you don't mind, let's give Tom a round of applause.
Thanks so much. Thanks a lot. Everything well.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we working? Can you hear me back there? Is it on? Or did I just turn it off? Probably. It's working? Okay. Good. I guess I'll put one of these in each pocket. That looks a little weird. That's a little weird, isn't it? Okay, I'll put them in this one. Excuse me. This is the third time I've had an opportunity to speak at BYU, and I want to thank everyone for this opportunity. I like to come here because I'm not a Mormon. I'm a born-again Christian Presbyterian, but of the lectures that I give, this is the only one where a prayer is said before the class, and even a prayer for me, and I really respect and appreciate that, so thank you very much. I went to medical school at Indiana University in 1966, my freshman year. At the time, Indiana was the largest medical school in the United States. I don't know if it still is as far as number of students go, but we had 220 medical students in our class. And every morning we would come to a lecture hall. It was kind of like an amphitheater. And we would have lectures, 1 hour lectures from 8 to 12. And then in the afternoon we'd go into the laboratory. And that's how medical school was taught in 1966. I don't know if it still is. I'm sure it's changed. But for the first 2 years, we'd have 4 one-hour lectures 5 days a week. Well, one of the problems we had was staying awake for 4 one-hour lectures. So just outside of this amphitheater, there was a coffee vending machine and a snack machine. And at this time, remember this is 1966, you'd put your dime in the coffee machine, and sometimes you'd get a half a cup, and sometimes it'd be strong, sometimes it'd be weak, and you'd push the cream button and you'd get sugar, and everybody complained about the coffee machine. And of course, right next to it was a snack machine, vending machine. And again, it would cheat you on the change, and the snacks would be stale, and they'd already be opened, and anyway, it was a mess. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to finance my way through medical school, because I didn't have enough money to, probably shouldn't have started. But, so I'm thinking, well, everybody's wanting coffee and snacks. So I go down to the local appliance store, and I bought 2 50-cup percolators, $10.95 each. I then went to the local baker who lived a block from my apartment, whose bakery was a block from my apartment, and I cut a deal with him to provide me with fresh donuts and sweet rolls, which he would leave in big boxes outside of my apartment every morning at 4 o'clock. So I would go down to school to this big amphitheater, and right next to it, there was, on the opposite side from where the vending machines were, there was a little alcove. And I went across to one of the classrooms and pulled one of the classroom tables over and put my 2 50-cup percolators on the table. And I would get there around 6:30 in the morning so that I'd have fresh coffee brewed when everybody started filing in for the 4 one-hour lectures. And then I would put my donuts and sweet rolls right on this same table. And I literally had a cigar box that I used for change. Well, I was afraid to ask anyone for permission because I knew there'd be some reason I couldn't do it. So I just did it. And sure enough, you know, the lines would file every morning. I mean, it was everybody bought coffee and fresh donuts and sweet rolls from, I bought the donuts for 3 cents, sold them for a dime, bought the sweet rolls for a nickel, sold them for 15 cents. I could make a cup of coffee for 1.50 cents. And I had some sugar and cream there that cost me a little bit. So I start selling coffee and donuts. When the lecture would start, I would sit in the back of the class and I would throw out the coffee and get 2 fresh pots going, sneak into the back of the class, and when I thought the lecture was about to end, I'd sneak out the back and get all set up, ready for the onrush of students. Well, the building that this amphitheater was in the same building where the administration was. And apparently, the deans thought that one of the other deans had given me permission to do it because they sent their secretaries down to buy coffee from my coffee concession. Well, believe it or not, this is 1966, I took home $100 a week profit from selling. I mean, I'd sell several hundred cups of coffee a day, and I'd almost always sell out my donuts and sweet rolls. And I took home $100 a week profit. Well, in 1966, that paid for my housing, my food. I mean, that's how I got through my first 2 years of medical school. So at the end of my second year, I knew then I was going to have to go out and work in the hospitals and do my rotations, and I would no longer have this 4 one-hour lectures in the morning. So towards the end of my sophomore year, I put an announcement on the Indiana University Medical School bulletin board that I was selling my coffee concession and was taking closed bids, and that if you were interested in bidding, you had to have your bid in by 5 o'clock on Friday night. So 5 o'clock Friday night, and I left a little slot there. I had 7 bids. The high bid was for $1,500. So I turned over my 2 $10.95 pots to someone from the class behind me and took their $1,500 and sold my coffee concession. I told this same story to my class. I teach at Columbia in the business school. I teach entrepreneurship. And one of the students in the class, his father had gone to Indiana University Medical School. So that night he went home and told his dad that his professor had told this story. Well, his dad graduated in 1976. I remember this was 1966. So his dad said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Yeah, that's still going." He said, so 10 years later, I guess it was still going. Well, there's an epilogue to the story that makes this a good story. And that's this. 15 years later, 1981, I sell my first company, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. It was a company that provides emergency physicians to hospitals. I sold it to a company that many of you are probably familiar with. It's a company called Aramark, A-R-A, Aramark. Used to be ARA, now it's Aramark. They do periodical distribution, uniform rental and maintenance. They do contracts with universities and professional sports stadiums to provide food service. It's about a $12 billion company. Well, in 1981, I sold them my first company, this emergency physician company. And the chairman of the board and CEO, a guy named Bill Fishman, invited me to have dinner in the CEO dining room. Because I was, just sold the company, he wanted to get to know me. And he had at the table, he had the CFO and the COO and a couple of division presidents. And so I sat down, and of course the focus of the conversation was on me. They wanted to know, who I was and about my business and my background. So I told them where I'd gone to school and med school. Somehow I get to tell them the questioning, this story I just told you about the coffee concession. About halfway through the story, the CEO, Bill Fishman, slams his fist on the desk and says, I had the exclusive contract to sell coffee and snacks on the Indiana University Medical School campus at that time. Those were my vending machines outside the door. So ARA started as a vending machine company. That was their first business. And those were, he said, I had the exclusive. He laughed about it because it's 15 years later. But those were his vending machines out on the other side. Anyway, in 1970, I got out of medical school. And at that time, 80% of the hospitals in the United States did not have a physician in the emergency room. May surprise you. 80%, no doctor in the emergency room. The way the emergency room ran was the nurses would see the patient, gunshot wounds, automobile accidents, heart attacks. The nurse would see him, try to stabilize him, and call a doctor at home. And then hopefully they could get the doctor to come in to see the patient. So I worked at such an emergency room in Lafayette, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis, as a student, just helping out in the emergency room, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. I couldn't understand, why wouldn't you have a physician immediately available in an emergency room? Of course, as you all know, that's changed now, and now 95% or more of all hospitals in the United States have a physician immediately available in the emergency room. Anyway, 1970, I was real interested in emergency medicine, and I became an emergency physician. At that time, there were no emergency medicine residency programs as there are today. There's probably 75 residency programs now. But at that time, there was no such specialty as emergency medicine. So I moved to St. Louis, and I started working at a hospital in Granite City, Illinois, which is right across the Mississippi from St. Louis. And this hospital, this community, had 5 primary care physicians. And I was working 2 or 3 shifts a week in the emergency room, 12-hour shifts. And within a period of 6 months, 3 of those 5 physicians were gone. 1 died, 1 got divorced and moved away, and 1 decided to take a radiology residency. So all of a sudden, within a period of a few months, a community that had 5 primary care physicians were down to 2. Now, what do all those patients do for their primary care if their doctors are gone? They go to the emergency room. And of course, that's a problem we have to this day. It's a crisis, particularly for the uninsured population who use our emergency rooms for their primary care, which is about 5 times as expensive as it would be if they could have access to a primary care physician in an outpatient facility. So, the administrator of this hospital says, what am I going to do? The volume in the emergency room has tripled in the last 3 months, and I can't find doctors to work there. He said, Dr. Cooper, you got to work more shifts. And I said, well, there's only so many shifts I can work. So I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute here, maybe this guy's got a crisis. This guy's in pain. And one of the things you want to think about as an entrepreneur, if you're looking for an idea, is look for somebody who's in pain, somebody who's hurt, somebody who's got a real problem, because there's always an opportunity there. So I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Maybe I can get some of my buddies to work over here. So I told the administrator, I said, look, you pay me, you give me all these shifts, I'll either work them or I'll get some of my buddies to work them. He said, okay. So I took on, like 20 shifts a week, and I'd work 3 or 4. He paid me for 20, and I'd go out and get some of my physician friends, get them licensed in Illinois and credentialed, and then they would work other shifts. So, and I had a margin. I think at the time I was getting $20 an hour from the hospital, and I was paying the doctor $15. So that $5 an hour was my margin for being responsible for recruiting and scheduling and licensing and all the issues, administrative issues. Well, lo and behold, another hospital called me and said, "We hear what you're doing down at St. Elizabeth's. Could you do it at our hospital?" And I then realized that I had a chance to build a business. And over the next, about the next 8 years, I built that company. We had 300 hospitals under contract. We had 2,000 physicians working for us. And that's the company that I sold to Aramark, a company called Spectrum Emergency Care. And that was my first company. When I was running the company, I was sitting in my office one morning, and it's a Wednesday morning, which is significant in the story. And I was reading the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I read the sports page first, as many of you probably do. And on the 3rd page of the sports page, down in the corner, there was an ad like I'd never seen before, and it said, "Warden Mike Lane needs doctors. Call Menard Prison, Chester, Illinois," and it had the phone number. And I said, "Well, I've never seen an ad like that in a newspaper. I wonder what this is all about." Now, I knew that Chester, Illinois was 60 miles south of St. Louis. I knew that we were providing doctors all over that area to all the little towns, emergency rooms. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I could get doctors to go down to this prison. So that's Wednesday morning. I called Warden Mike Lane, and whoever answered the phone put me right through to him. And I said, "Look, I'm Dr. Cooper. I have a company that provides doctors for emergency rooms. Maybe we can provide them for your prison." He said, "My nurse and I will be up this afternoon." They drove up. I signed a contract that afternoon, which is the quickest turnaround I'd ever had on any sale. That Friday, remember that was a Wednesday, that Friday he went into federal court where he was under indictment for violating the inmate's civil rights by providing inadequate medical care, by not providing Illinois licensed physicians. He laid our contract on the desk, and it got him off the hook. So now I got to get some doctors to go down to Menard Prison. And, of course, I had to pay a pretty price to do it, but I got some to go, and we covered from 6 in the evening till 10, Monday through Friday, and then 12 hours on Saturday and Sunday. And it started working. The doctors went down there. Now, I don't know if you know much about maximum security prison, but in a prison that has over 1,000 inmates, they try and deliver as much health care as possible within the walls because it's so expensive and dangerous to take the inmate out of the prison. You've got to send guards with them. They've got to be handcuffed. They're in prison garb, and physicians don't want them sitting in their office. Hospitals don't want them waiting in their waiting room. So it's very difficult to take the inmate out of the prison to get health care. So they try and deliver a lot of health care within the walls. So within the walls of a maximum security prison, you've got pharmacy, you've got medical records, X-ray, EKG, and usually you have maybe half a dozen beds, sick beds for patients. So our doctors who started going down there would come back and tell me, "Oh, you can't imagine what kind of a mess that healthcare system is. There's X-rays sitting over in the corner that have never been read. The medical records are a mess. The pharmacy's out of control," which is something you don't want out of control in a prison. So I got to think, well, wait a minute. Me and my administrative team probably know more about how to run a healthcare system than the prison does. And I thought, we're providing doctors. Why couldn't we provide the nurses, the X-ray techs, manage the medical records, read the EKGs, and do the whole thing ourselves, and have them contract out that function within the prison, which is not a security function. It's not a normal function for a prison to provide. So by this time, my friend Warden Mike Lane is now Commissioner Lane, for the Department of Corrections for the state of Illinois. And I called Commissioner Lane and said, look, my doctors have been giving me this feedback about the healthcare system in your prison. By this time, we had about half a dozen prisons we were providing doctors to. I said, I think we can provide the health care more efficiently and better quality. And if you'll give me one of the prisons to do it, and I can contract with you for one of the prisons for the health care system, we'll do it. I'd appreciate that, and we'll give it a shot. He said, okay, I'll give you Pontiac Prison, Pontiac, Illinois, 900 inmates. We took over, and this year, Correctional Medical Systems, which is the name of the company, will do over $1 billion in revenue. They're responsible for 300,000 inmates in 14 states. And basically what they do is they go in and provide the whole healthcare system within the walls for the prison. So that was the second company I started. Now, I sold it when it was much smaller, but the CEO, the current CEO, is a friend of mine, and he told me this year that they'll do over $1 billion. Now, when you run a service business, you have some crazy things happen. And I was on call one weekend, and we had a contract with the Iowa State Prison, Fort Madison, Iowa, which is the main maximum security prison in Iowa. And we had our best administrator, who was an RN, who worked at this prison, who basically ran the healthcare system. She was fantastic. She was the best we'd ever had. On Friday night, I'm on call. I get a call from the warden at the Iowa State Prison that apparently our nurse had fallen in love with an inmate and helped him escape. So you can imagine getting a call like that on Friday night and having to deal with that kind of a service people problem. She ends up getting caught, and she went to prison herself, so it was a mess. We got the contract at the Georgia State Prison in Reidsville, Georgia. Now, most of you are too young, but there was a movie called The Longest Yard. Now, there's one with Adam Sandler that just came out a few years ago, but before that, there was another one with Burt Reynolds. Well, The Longest Yard was filmed at Reidsville Prison. I mean, this place is tough. This is one of the toughest prisons in the country. So we got the contract in March to take over the healthcare system. Supposed to start July 1st. Couldn't get a doctor to go there. So we were in a crisis mode because the time was coming upon us that we had to get going. So we had a team of 6 recruiters, and we took a compass and drew a 200-mile radius from Reidsville, Georgia. And that included Jacksonville, Florida, Atlanta. And this team of 6 recruiters got on the phone and started dialing every licensed physician within a 200-mile radius, and we couldn't get a single doctor to go down there for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which was the reputation of the prison. So I'm starting to panic, and I get a call from one of the recruiters saying, I just got a call from a Georgia licensed physician who wants to work at the Georgia State Prison. And I said, oh, thank gosh, put him right through to me. So I got on the phone with this guy, and he said, I'm licensed in Georgia. I don't live too far from Reidsville. I'm looking for work. I'd be glad to work down there. And I said, well, when can you be interviewed? And he said, well, I can be there tomorrow. And I said, I'll meet you there. So I leave my office, go down to the airport, fly to Atlanta, drive over to Reidsville. Next morning I get up, I'm sitting in the administrative office looking out through the bars, and a car pulls up in the circular driveway in front of the prison. And the driver of the car is a nurse in a nurse's uniform. Well, I assumed it was a nurse with a nurse's cap on. And sitting on the passenger seat was a gentleman, looked in his mid-50s, in a suit. Well, the nurse gets out of the driver's side of the car and walks around to the other side, opens the door, and the gentleman gets out, and arm in arm, they walk up to the administration building and come to my office. Well, it doesn't take me long to realize that this physician is totally blind. He'd apparently lost his sight in an accident, had never reported it to the state licensing board, still maintained a full medical license. So now, I want to be fair to a handicapped person, but I started asking him questions about how he was going to deal with certain issues, and I'd say, well, how do you read an x-ray? He said, oh, well, my wife, she's a nurse, and I've trained her how to do that. I said, well, how would you suture someone if they had a laceration? Oh, I've trained her how to do that. She's very good. I said, well, if you examine a patient, how can you tell? Well, she helps me examine patients and tells me about the coloration. Anyway, can you imagine? And I was pretty desperate to get a doctor in there, but if we'd have put a blind doctor in there, we'd have been in a lot of trouble. The inmates always try to disrupt the system, so one of their pleasures in life is seeing how they can disrupt the system. They found out this new company was coming in to run the healthcare system on July 1st. So on July 1st, 1,200 of the 1,500 inmates put in for sick call. And, of course, legally, if they put in for sick call, you're supposed to see them. So you can imagine the mess. We finally got a doctor, and it worked out. But those are some of the kind of things you run into. In the late 70s, the military was having a lot of trouble getting enlisted healthcare personnel. And they have a lot of hospitals and clinics all over the United States and in foreign countries as well. And they were having trouble staffing them with enlisted people. So they started going out into communities and trying to recruit doctors and nurses within local communities who would come work at the military facilities, clinics and hospitals. And I saw one of my salespeople saw some ads for this and forwarded it to me. And, of course, my first thought is, what a mess that's going to be for the military to try and coordinate one by one these doctors and nurses and getting them credentialed and licensed and, and all the things you got to go and schedule and what happens if they quit and so forth. So I saw an opportunity for our company to contract with the military, tell us what your needs are, we'll go out and get them. And I started that business. It's called Spectrum Military Health, and it'll do about $250 million in revenue. I think it did about $250 million in revenue last year. That was basically bringing civilian medical personnel into clinics, military clinics, and hospitals. When I sold the emergency room business to ARA, ARA also owned 260 nursing homes. And they asked me if I would get involved with their nursing home business. And I became the director of quality assurance for a year and learned a lot about nursing homes. And there are a lot of problems in nursing homes, and there are to this day. But one of the things that struck me was how poorly the outside services were delivered to nursing homes, how disorganized it was. And after I finished that year, I decided that they have outside pharmacy, they have rehab, physical therapy come in, they have portable X-ray and EKG. So I bought a company with J.P. Morgan's backing, a little company in Los Angeles that was doing about $1 million in revenues, providing portable X-ray and EKGs to patients in nursing homes. Now you can see the obvious value there, doing those services in the nursing home rather than putting a patient in an ambulance, taking them to the hospital, the emergency room doctor sees them and goes, wait a minute, we better admit this patient, they got all kinds of problems. It ends up being a several $1,000 deal, whereas we could go in and do an X-ray for $150. So the government had good reimbursement for portable X-ray and EKG because they knew how much money it saved the system. Well, this X-ray tech, who I don't even know if he had a high school degree, had started carrying around a portable X-ray machine in his trunk, and his wife did the books in the garage, and he would go to nursing homes and take X-rays. And pretty soon he needed more help, so he hired another X-ray tech and bought another piece portable radiographic machine and would go. So we bought his company, and after we bought it, and during the due diligence, we realized that virtually every major metropolitan area of the United States had one of these portable X-ray companies, usually started by an X-ray tech who worked out of his garage. And some of them were as big as $2-3 million in revenue. Some were $500,000. Some were $200,000. And through a series of 25 acquisitions, we basically consolidated the industry and did what's known as a roll-up. We rolled up all these companies. So we basically then controlled portable X-ray and EKGs for nursing homes, sold that company to a nursing home chain out in Maryland, and that was about $180 million in revenue when we sold it, providing simple portable X-ray and EKGs to patients in nursing homes. Another real need in nursing homes is a lot of patients in nursing homes are depressed. And if any of you have been in a nursing home, worked in a nursing home, or had a loved one in a nursing home, you can understand why. It's estimated that over 50% of the patients are clinically depressed. Until 1990, Medicare provided no reimbursement for psychology. But in 1990, they started providing reimbursement. I looked at the reimbursement. I looked at the opportunity. I knew depression was rampant in nursing homes. So I started a company providing psychologists who would go into the nursing home and provide psychotherapy. That company is called VeraCare. It's based in San Diego. I'm now chairman of the board. Brought in some venture capital, and they brought in a new CEO. And they service about 1,200 nursing homes. They have 300 psychologists, 25 psychiatrists providing psych care, psychotherapy to patients in nursing homes. California, Texas, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Florida, Arkansas. So, again, that company is called VeraCare. Now, one of the other things that I noticed in nursing homes was that patients in nursing homes do not get dental care or eye care. Now, think about it. If you're a patient in a nursing home, your life generally, the joy in your life revolves around meals, TV, reading. So dental care and eye care, you would think, would be very important to a nursing home patient. Well, most nursing homes don't get dental care and eye care. It doesn't exist. So I'm thinking maybe there's some way we could provide this in the nursing home. And I found out that there indeed is portable dental equipment, and there's portable eye examination equipment. And we put them on carts, and we brought little Chevy Astro vans, and we had ramps. And we would actually go bedside and see patients in nursing homes and do dental exams and eye exams. Well, the need was incredible. Within the first 3 months, we picked up 15 oral cancers. We had one lady who had a drainage from her eye, and the doctor looked inside. She had had a stroke, and she was non-communicative. And she wasn't able to tell people that she had a hard contact lens in her eye, and the sclera had actually grown over the contact lens. And no one had looked in her eye. There was no professional to look in her eye to find out what was going on, but it was a contact lens. Now, that's going on to this day. So, anyway, so dental care and eye care, portable. Going to the nursing home, doing it bedside. Now, some of the homes had a room where we could set up as well. We had a portable dental chair. Now, the demand, the need was unbelievable. In sales, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I'm used to having to convince someone else to buy my product or service. Find out what their needs are and sell them on what you've got to offer. Well, I've never faced a situation like this. The nursing homes call me. I didn't have to call them to sell them. They were calling me, hey, we heard you're providing dental care and eye care over at XYZ nursing home. Could you come to our home? And I could barely keep up with the demand. Now, we had about 15 trucks on the road. We were in San Diego County, Orange County, and Phoenix. And after about a year, I realized that the business wasn't going to make it. Now, you've got an incredible demand. Customers, nursing homes wanting your service. But I missed a very important thing, and maybe the most important thing you'll take away from our talk today. What did I miss? Think about it now. Very simple. I missed one thing. Why did this business fail? Why do you think it failed? No? Exactly. Very good. Very simple. Who's going to pay for it? Now you'd think, here's this smart guy, Tom, who started a couple companies, but wasn't smart enough to remember that I don't care what the need is. If you don't have a payment source, if somebody's not willing to open their wallet and pay you for your product or service, forget about it. And that's what happened. Now, California had Medicaid reimbursement for dental care, but it didn't cover my cost. Medicare pays nothing for dental care. There's no reimbursement for dental care. There are only 15 states in the United States, I think Utah's one of them, that provide any reimbursement under Medicaid for dental care. Now, why is that important? It's important because 67% of patients in nursing homes are on Medicaid. That means they've spent down all of their net worth, and they're on 67% of patients in nursing homes are on Medicaid. So unless the state has an adequate reimbursement program for dental care, these patients get no dental care. Doesn't happen. Doesn't exist. And that's true to this day. Now, eye care. I ran into another problem. We were going in doing eye examinations. We were finding people who had glaucoma, who were going blind, where all you have to do is put a couple of drops in morning and night, and you solve the problem. We had people who had eye infections, the one I mentioned earlier. All kinds of problems. Almost every patient we saw, we found some kind of problem. Well, we submitted the bills to Medicare, and Medicare wouldn't pay us because they said the rule is we won't pay you unless the patient has a pre-existing condition. Well, it's a catch-22 because how do they know if the patient has a pre-existing condition unless you do the examination? So all my examinations got denied. So I had to shut the business down, and it failed. So the lesson is make sure if you're going to have a product or service that there's somebody, a payment source, somebody willing to pay you. Okay, let's talk about what I've learned in starting 7 healthcare companies, one of which failed, 4 of which became the largest in their niche in the United States, and one, which is Vericare, the psych company, which is now the largest as well. First of all, if there's any individual skill you need as an entrepreneur, it's sales. Now, some people think of sales as a dirty word, or it's, well, I'm above sales. Well, let me tell you, if you aren't willing to do sales, it's going to be very difficult for you to be an entrepreneur. Because the only way you can understand whether or not your products or service, the only way you can modify it, change it, and meet the customer's need is by interacting with the customer. Because you may think you know what the customer wants, or you know what the customer needs. But unless you interact with the customer, you won't find out what they really need, and it may not at all be what you are offering. And you may need to modify your product and service to meet the customer's needs. And the only way you can do that is if you're involved in sales. So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, don't even think that you're going to hire a bunch of salespeople and have them do it all and you sit back in your desk. You have got to be an active participant in the sales process, because that's the only way you can understand the customer's needs, is by you interacting with them. If it comes back from your salesman, it's filtered through the salesman's eyes. So you need to be very actively involved in sales. Secondly, if you like to live life on an even keel, you may not be cut out to be an entrepreneur. Because as an entrepreneur, one day you have changed the world and have become a multi-millionaire, and within 48 hours you're worried about your house payment. And that's the way entrepreneurship goes. One day things are great, you sign a big contract, the next day you lose your biggest contract, or your chief operating officer quits, or reimbursement changes so that your business no longer is profitable. The next day you sign a huge contract. So if you like to live life on an even keel, it's going to be very hard for you as an entrepreneur. Now, one of the ways you can help temper that is by having a partner or partners. Now, figuring out who that partner is, figuring out how you divide up the equity, how you divide up the responsibilities, can be very tricky. A natural tendency would be to to team up with a friend or a relative, because you know their work ethic, you know their morals, you may have worked with them or spent a lot of time with them, and you're thinking, boy, this person would partner up with me. I think we could make this happen. That you trust them. So that's one option. But you need to be aware there's a downside to that option, and that's this. if things don't work, or even if they do work, you're taking a risk on that relationship with a friend or a relationship with a relative. And I've been through one, a terrible one. My best friend, who, if my wife and I went down in an airplane crash, he and his wife would get our kids. That's how close we were. And he was one of my partners in the emergency physician business. We started the business that failed that I talked about. He was my partner in that. And our relationship shattered. We were college roommates. We played football together. Our families were close. We vacationed together. But when that business went south, I'd like to say that he treated me unfairly, but I'm sure he has a side to his story as well. And our relation, that's been 20 years, and I haven't spoken to him in 20 years. This is my closest friend. So I'm saying that to warn you to be careful, because if you choose friends or relatives for business partners, you're taking some risk. If you're going to start a business with partners, the sooner you determine who owns how much of the business, the better. If you wait and say, oh, let's get the business going, once we start making money, then we'll figure out how to split it up, that's a recipe for disaster. Because one person will think they did more than the other, one person will think they're working harder than the other. All kinds of things can happen. So if you're going to go into business with someone else, it's a good idea to try and get established right off the bat how you're going to split up the ownership and the decision making. And if I had another hour here, I've got an exercise I can take you through on how to do that, but we won't have time today. I want to leave time for questions, so a couple other points. It's probably going to take you 2 to 3 to 5 times as long to start your business as you think it's going to take you. The natural tendency for an entrepreneur, I see you smiling, is that you think, oh, that'll take me a couple of weeks and I'll be up and running. Well, very rarely, if ever, does it happen that way. It's always going to take you longer. You also you're going to do a business plan or some kind of rudimentary financial projection. It'll probably cost you 3 to 5 times as much to get your business going as you thought it was going to cost you. Because even though you think you've got every expense covered, something's going to pop up, and I guarantee you, it will not go the way you thought. I don't care what it will not go the way you thought. Something's going to change. That's why an entrepreneur has to be flexible. You have to be willing to say, whoops, that's a basic tenet of my business, and it's not working. You can't die on that stake. You've got to say, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong on that. I'm going to have to figure out another way to do this. Because it will happen. I guarantee it. Your revenue projections, you can cut those by about 75%. So if you think you're going to make $100,000 in revenue the first year, you'll probably be doing well if you make 25. So, as you look at projections, and, my students at Columbia do a business plan. That's the culmination of their class. And it happens every time. And when I send them back their papers, I have to cut the revenues and have to increase the costs because they'll miss out on some major cost factor. So major surprises will happen. There's more than a 50-50 chance that the business you started within 6 months will be different than what you thought it was going to be. That's when you start a business from scratch, that's just the nature of entrepreneurship. Now, last point, and I'll take some questions. If you're going to start a business, and all of you or many of you may have started a small business, or you maybe have something in mind that you're thinking about starting, it's prudent to do some research, find out who the competitors are, find out how much is it going to cost you to put together your product or service, what are the regulatory issues and legal issues involved. So it's good to do that. But there comes a point, if you do too much of it, you'll find a reason not to do the business. If you do too much research, you'll end up scrapping it. because you'll find out too many reasons. You'll talk to too many naysayers. So, if you believe in an idea and you're willing to make the sacrifices that it takes to start a business, and they aren't easy, and if you have a spouse, you better make sure that he or she's on board, because starting a business from scratch is very tough. More than half are going to fail. So, what you have to do is do your basic research, be prudent, but at some point you got to step up to that cliff and look over the edge and say, am I going to do this or not? And if you're going to do it and believe in yourself and want to make the commitment, you jump. And you will learn more from that jump about yourself, about your business, than from anything, all the research in the world. The main thing about entrepreneurship is to do it. Now, will you fail? Of course, you'll have failures. But fortunately, we live in a culture that if you fail, it doesn't mean you failed as a human being or that you can't try again. There are other cultures, when someone fails, virtually their business career is over. Not in ours. In fact, a lot of prudent business people admire someone who's tried something and failed, and I'm a venture capitalist. If I see someone who's failed and I believe they've learned from that failure, I will invest in them before I'll invest in someone who's never tried. So, the worst that could happen, you fail. Okay, so you lose some money, you got to start over. Maybe you have to go back and work at a regular job for a while until you can try again if that's what you want to do. But the important thing is to make that leap and make that commitment. I'm going to make this happen. And then when that brick wall comes up, you figure, okay, how am I got to go over it, I got to go under it, I got to go around it. You'll figure out a way to do it. So, making that commitment is critical. Doing whatever you are thinking about doing as far as entrepreneurship is the best way to learn how to be an entrepreneur, is doing it. Not reading about it, not studying about it in the class, not writing a business plan, not talking to competitors. The best way to learn is just do it. Now, will you fail? Yes. There'll be times you'll fail. But hopefully you'll learn from that failure, and the next time you try it, you'll be better. Maybe you'll fail again. But, every time you fail, you learn so much, you take so much in, that at some point, I guarantee you, you'll be a success if you'll learn from your failures. Okay, we got 10 minutes. Any questions? Yes?
As a doctor, would you find it attractive to start your own business as a start your own, I lost my word on this, start your own practice rather than work for another healthcare center?
Okay. I think that's a personal decision. It has a lot to do with what you want out of your practice. It has a lot to do with your mental makeup, your resources. If you want to basically practice medicine, if that's your joy is seeing patients and healing them and helping them get better, then it's probably better to join a group where all the administrative and management and billing, collecting details, so you can focus just on patients and practicing medicine. Then you should join a group. If you're a little more entrepreneurial and want to deal with issues like hiring and firing secretaries and nurses, doing billing and collecting, and all that stuff that a private entrepreneur has to do because you enjoy doing it, so it has a lot to do with what you want out of your practice, what resources you have available to you. So I don't have an easy answer for that. Part of it depends on what specialty are you studying to be a doctor? Oh. Oh, okay. What's his specialty? Okay. Okay. Yeah. If you and he, do you work together? Does he want you involved in his practice and managing it or anything? Okay. Because the one thing you could do is you could start a family practice by himself and then start adding more family practitioners as he builds up contracts and patient load. So, yes?
How did you find so many doctors to work for your contracting business? Like, didn't they already have job, you know,
Yeah.
to fill those shifts that you took up?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I first started, most of my doctors were residents in training, because residents in training get licensed before they finish their training. If they finish medical school and an internship, in almost all states, you can get a license in that state to practice medicine, even though you haven't. So when we started, most of our doctors were residents who worked with us on a part-time basis. Now, as the emergency medicine evolved as a specialty in its own right, then we were able to hire full-time emergency room doctors who worked exclusively for us. But the key to that business and to the prison business was the one you put your finger on, is how do you get the docs to go? And, you know, scratch, I mean, you got to pay them. And that's, you know, so that was the key. In any service business like that, the key is the people you're going to be sending in to provide the service. Yes?
What was your main motivation in starting this business? Was it money? Was it taking care of people? What was it?
Money.
Was money?
Yeah. Now, you'll probably have speakers come here and tell you that they were altruistic and wanted to change the world, and maybe they did. I needed to figure out how to survive. As I did in medical school and undergraduate school, I saw an opportunity to make money. Now, I knew that the things I was doing were more efficient than the way they were before. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had a business. So I knew that I was improving the healthcare system. I knew that I was helping more patients than I could if I had a private practice. But my main motivation was to build a business that made money. And I'm not ashamed of it. I mean, we're in a capitalistic society, and if you follow the rules and you're fair and you treat employees right and you treat the patients right and you provide a valuable service, there's nothing wrong with making money. Yes?
Was that helpful when you sold? Did you use that as core when you sold to people and you talked with them about getting your business and with them? Was the truth in the research that you found that it was going to actually help and really be a benefit? And not just the motivation of
Yeah.
money.
No, I was so convinced that what we were doing would be better. For example, the emergency room business. Now, here's what I'm doing. I'm bringing a doctor to sit in an emergency room to see emergency room patients instead of what they had before, which is a nurse, and hopefully calling the doctor in. It's a no-brainer. I know what I'm doing is improving the health care in that community. Now, I can pay the doc $20 an hour, and I make 30, so I make a spread at $10 an hour. That's fine. You know, there was no question that I was improving the quality of care in that community. So have I ever done anything where I didn't think it improved the care? No. But that hasn't always been my primary motivation. Yes?
Well, I'm actually a nurse, and I've worked in the ER, and I've seen tons of resources pour into people who are not citizens, who are illegal. Have you ever thought about being politically involved to change that legislation to make it not legal, that we have to, I mean,
Yeah.
people that come in for dialysis, thousands of dollar procedure, and then they file for bankruptcy because they can't pay for it, so it comes from our tax dollars.
Yeah, you're talking about, you know, some really important issues, and we hear a lot about it in the campaigns going on,
Well, I
which...
think someone in your position could maybe pull a lot of weight.
Yeah. Well, I haven't got involved politically. I do believe that we as a country have a responsibility to take care of someone who, illegal or legal, gets in here and comes to an emergency room and they're sick or they're injured or they're hurt. I think we as a society have a responsibility to care for them, even if they're here illegally. Now, do I like it? No. Do I wish there was some other way to do it? Yes. But I think just my personal morals are that if we have someone who comes to an emergency room in one of our hospitals, I don't care where they're from, we have a responsibility to care for them. So, I mean, it's a tremendous problem. You know, the other problem, where I thought you were initially going, is the number of people who come to emergency rooms who don't need to be there. It's estimated that 40% of emergency room visits don't need to be there. 50% of primary care physicians, patients, the symptoms that bring them to the office are for symptoms of the common cold. Now, do we really need to tie up family practitioners to see patients for symptoms of the common cold? Now, what happens if they don't have a primary care physician? Where do they go for the symptoms of the common cold? They go to the emergency room, and it's a $400, $500 bill. So it's a real problem, and I probably should get involved in some way. Anything else? Yes.
You went to medical school. How did you learn the business skills that you needed to do?
Okay.
so much?
In college and medical school, I had to do various things in order to finance my way through college and med school. So I was a businessman right off the bat. My dad was a farmer, and farmers are the ultimate entrepreneurs. So I was raised in an entrepreneurial environment, and I knew that I had to make money if I was going to go to college and med school to pay for my way. So I got, I had a kind of a business. And then when I got in medical school and I saw all the inefficiencies, I saw, well, hey, here's an opportunity to do this better, or here's an opportunity to provide a better service and make money, or here's an opportunity to make money and provide a better service, depending on the priority. So, any other questions? Well, thank you very much.